like you all to welcome you all to our presentation, Creativity, a Celebration. I'm Sonia, and it has been a year since Alan Frank and I have shared some thoughts on creativity and creative processes in our presentation called Creativity, It's Not Mickey Mouse. And the response to that presentation was absolutely overwhelming. We repeated it many, many times. We had many, many videos reproduced of it, and people are still asking us for more information. So rather than continuing discussing in the abstract, we gathered a few of our friends here in the corporate design group, and together we're going to share a number of projects whose creativity spans different dimensions. For those of you that may not be familiar with the corporate design group, it's the Center of Innovation and Design Excellence, and it's primarily focused on user-driven design. The teams in our group are multidisciplinary. We're composed of engineers, computer scientists, human factor specialists, behavioral scientists, psychologists, visual designers, interaction designers, industrial designers, mechanical designers, graphic designers, you name it, we've got it. We're one big happy family. So the focus in our group is on new and future products, and we provide early visualization, customer qualification, and hardware and software integration. Now, what we're going to do today is show 5 vignettes. Spacebar. And these 5 vignettes will expose our real-life experiences in the design of new and future telecommunications products. So we've got From Mickey Mouse to Goofy, which will be done by Trish Stolte, and she'll be pushing the envelope in network OEM interfaces through animation. We have Engaging Interfaces, which I will be doing, where we'll be exploring mechanisms of engagement and testing them on network OEM interfaces. Then there's Understanding Communications, which will be done by Alan Frank, and what he's going to look at is identifying people's communication needs through understanding theater. We've got Conservation of Ideas, and that will be done by Pinder, and the best I can say about that is that we're going to be learning about Pinder's law of conservation. And then finally, we've got the whole product experience, and Gord Hopkins will be doing that presentation, and there he'll be providing a framework which optimizes product design to channel, chooser, and user value. So to begin, I'd like to introduce Trish Stolte, and she's a visual designer in the corporate design group, and she's going to share how her background as a professional animator can be applied to human product interfaces and create new and engaging experiences for users of our products. So over to you, Trish.
Alrighty. Okay, can you all hear me? Yes? Okay, hi, I'm Trish Stolte. I work, as Sonia said, in doing visual interaction design for CDG. And my presentation, From Mickey Mouse to Goofy, after I show you my movies, I'll let you be the judge. I think they're pretty goofy, but they're fun. Typically, I'm going to talk a little bit about animation. Typically, animation in interfaces exists to communicate information, usually a duration of something, something taking place to affirm an action or an operation. We've all seen the trash can emptying. We've seen the spinning globe, the time bar. Sometimes they're very engaging. The little dog in the fetch program that sort of runs or gallops away as it fetches your information. Usually it's very simple interface animation. It's usually a 1 or 2 or 3 drawing cycle, and it's because it's just to communicate something quickly and not get too distracting. Animation in interfaces that I consider bad is usually too long, it's too distracting, it's cutesy, it's annoying, and it's vague or uninformative. I come out of a completely different background in animation. I'll tell you a little bit about it. For 9 years I worked in classical animation, character animation, and I trained at Sheridan College in Oakville. Largely character-driven animation. Some of the shows that I've worked on, I worked in TV series and TV specials and in feature films. And some of the things that you might be familiar with are the Raccoons, For Better or For Worse, the Nutcracker Prince, which was an animated feature that one of the studios I worked for did. And more recently, Ren and Stimpy, which some of you might have seen, and Beavis and Butthead, those lovable goofballs. Anyway, Ren and Stimpy especially sort of epitomizes really outrageous animation, and it's especially fun. Most of the stuff that we have done over the past years, or when I worked for the studios I worked for, very low tech, high concept, high execution, but very low tech. Pencil on paper, no computers. And there's certain physical principles that are at the cornerstone of good animation. So I'm just going to fill you in very briefly on a few of those, and then I'll show you three movies that I've done that embody some of those, where I've hoped to maybe break away from the simple cyclical animation that tends to be in interfaces, and I'm offering something a little more fun. So I'm going to walk over here, walk this way, and actually, I guess I should turn this presentation off just for a second, or they can do it. Okay, good. One of the foremost things is that objects in animation, characters in animation exist. They're a two-dimensional thing on paper, but you're trying to make the viewer believe that it's 3 dimensions, that they exist in a real physical space. And if they exist in real physical space, then they're being acted upon by physical principles, like gravity, that sort of thing. So you have to try to put that across. Something very simple is that simple shapes are usually the best because they can be acted upon, they can be expanded and contracted. And I'll show you a simple shape that you might be familiar with. Here's Stimpy. And even though he has some detail on him, he is essentially a big oval with a big oval nose and round eyes and hands that come off and that are basically more circles. So it's easy to take something like that and squish them and squash them and move them around. So simple shapes are really important. What we do with those simple shapes is a principle called squash and stretch. One of the very first things that we do in animation school is do an exercise called the bouncing ball. We take a round ball and we try to make it a sound effect, all right. And we take that ball, and to make it move, we travel it along a path of action, usually involves arcs, and anything that won't make it seem mechanical. Mechanical stuff happens in straight lines, and nothing acts or impinges upon it. If you want to make something seem more believable, you follow a curving path of action and you squash and stretch it. So just to draw you a little simple thing, if our character is based on, I should grab my black pen here, a simple circle, which won't be very good here. But anyway, simple circle, if it squashes, it retains essentially the same volume, but it flattens out. And if that squashes, and if it stretches up into an oval shape. So when we typically do our bouncing ball thing, we plan out an arc like this that the ball follows. And when it's at the top of the arc, it's a circle. When it's at the bottom of the arc, it's squishing down into the ground, so you really feel like it's physically something is happening. And when it's traveling at great speed, it's an oval like this. So it changes throughout the course of its action. And when you make this happen to characters, it really feels like they're living and breathing and squashing. And I'll show you that a little bit later on. Another thing, I mentioned the path of action. It's really important. If I were to try to plan out a walk cycle, I would never have the character simply move on a straight line like this if this was the ground. These markers aren't happening. But if I had a little character and I was walking him along, it would be very boring if he always moved in this line, because he would just seem to go like that. He would be like a robot. So instead, I would plan some sort of a dip where he's at a high point, up on his toe, leg following through, arms out. And when he's at the low point, his leg is bent, his leg is coming through, his arms are moving. So there's this thing happening, and it makes the character feel like it's alive. Another really important principle in animation is exaggeration. Remember that in typical animation, there are 24 frames in a second. That's an awful lot of drawing. You never actually see any of these drawings in isolation. You're not looking at them as a piece of work. They're part of a series. They're part of a continuum. They happen in a 1/12 of a second. So they don't have to exist as something that could really happen in real life. So you can exaggerate the heck out of it. Witness Ren. Why do just a simple, normal, little surprise take when you can have eyeballs that pop right out of a head and a tongue that is doing wild things? So exaggeration is really, really important. Another thing that's more from a conceptual level is that anything is possible. And that's something that I'll show you in my little bits. And that means visually or conceptually. So anything that you can draw can happen. anything that you can conceive of can happen. There are no barriers. And so that opens up enormous possibilities. Some of the unexpected things that can happen in animation are being applied into educational software, where the child is encouraged to explore and is rewarded by seeing little bits of animation, little, click on this, something happens, click over here, nothing happens, but oh, click on this cookie jar and something wild happens. So there's really exploiting some of those principles, and it makes it really fun. One other principle that is very important is timing. And that can mean a number of different things. Good animation has a variety of timing. Sometimes things are held still, because if it was always moving, it would be very nauseating. And I could probably give you examples of things that are over-animated. If anybody's ever seen Raggedy Ann and Andy, it's a feature film that was done in England years ago, and the thing never stops moving. It's beautifully and fluidly animated, but after a while, you're kind of getting seasick. So there should be times when things are still and quiet, and there should be other times when things are wild, as in that. And so there's a real variety of that. Sometimes things, you do many drawings to slow something down. You have fewer drawings to make things seem like they're happening very, very quickly. Now, the bits of animation that I'm going to show you, I sort of categorize as creative overflow. And what I mean by that is there are ideas that come up in the course of the work that I've done at CDG, which is mostly to do with network OAM. And in designing, now you might say, network OAM, there's nothing zany or creative or wacky about that. Well, I beg to differ, and I'll show you. But usually there are things that, in designing the screens that I've done, I thought, what if something really weird happened here? That would be funny. Or, geez, wouldn't it be a laugh if? And sometimes it comes out of conversations that when you're sitting around working on screens or demos with people. So instead of not doing it and just saying, oh, well, that's not suitable or appropriate, I've gone ahead and done it and then just sort of kept it in a little, to share with people, and not saying that it should be inserted into product. But it's just it's just fun stuff. And I can't stop myself. I just do it. So you'll see. So I've got 3 little films that I'm going to show you. One is called Coffee Alarms, and one is called Exploding Chip, and another is Alarm Guy. So I'll just go over to the computer. So keep in mind those principles, physical principles that I showed you, and see if you can spot them in these movies. Okay. Working very awkwardly here with, start with Coffee Alarms. These were all done in Director, Macromedia Director. It's an animation program. Now, on the screen, you can see a little coffee cup. What this came out of was during network OAM kind of development of stuff, we were talking about the idea of what if alarms happened of equipment and they cleared and you had been away from your desk and you didn't even know, and maybe there was a trend there that you should be aware of. So if you were going for coffee, you would set up your coffee alarm. Now, I'm going to click on my coffee cup to now it's actively monitoring my setup. I'm back from coffee now, and I'm going to click on this coffee cup and see if anything happened while I was gone. And it did. And I almost ruined a keyboard pouring coffee back and forth into the microphone so I could get that fabulous sound effect. And click, and it goes away. Another thing that we were concerned with was showing nodes, which are kind of tiny physically, but the need to show secondary state information on them and worrying about the real estate because it's really tricky. So we thought, well, what if we had a little pull tab of some sort? Well, I took the pull tab a little further, as you'll see, and a little window shade kind of thing. And sound effect, of course, would be optional. Now you can probably see there's a little bit of squash and stretch happening there. That final drawing, it just doesn't click down mechanically into the end position. It goes down a little further and then snaps back up to settle. And same thing when I clicked it closed, it goes down, then up and snaps up. So I've played with the timing a little bit. This, we were exploring or worried about trying to show what comprises the link in between 2 nodes. And that if you tried to come up with a symbology for each different kind of link, that it would get really thick between the 2 nodes. So what if you could telescope it, actually seem to cut the link, turn it into a cross-section? So it squishes, and you would have some sort of coding to show, and you could telescope it even further, and then you could and then it would go away. So that is the end of that movie, and I will open up another one. Exploding Chip. Okay, so here we have in an alarm monitor screen that shows a shelf graphic and an alarmed card. And so, if we wanted to explore that alarmed card and see what might happen. Oops, are we playing? Oh, wait, sorry, I got to click up here. I'm bending over backwards to use this mouse here. Okay, here we go. What the heck? And just for fun, I'll show it again. And off it goes. Okay, one more. Alarm guy. All right, here we have a screen from the Meridian Administration Tool. Pretty simple text view of a bunch of sites. This is done in the style of Windows 95. This is my answer to Bob, Microsoft's Bob, right? Microsoft has come up with this little agent you can choose from a number of different personalities, and it's a social interface that's supposed to make everything easier for new users. So I thought, okay, what the heck? Let's make things fun. So we get an alarm. And I'll show that to you again just so you can check it. It's running a little bit slow on this machine, so usually it's a little snappier than that, but there's not much I can do down here on this machine. Get our alarm. And I'll just step through this. I'll just wind back a little bit, and I'll show you, and you can watch the squashing and the stretching. Now, he parachutes down. You can see I've got a drop shadow happening as well, and that helps the believability aspect. He's stretching a little bit. He's really stretched. Now he's really squashed. And now he's really stretched because he's traveling at high speeds in his arc. You see the follow-through. He's being acted upon by gravity, so his arms are dragging. He's up at the top of his arc, so his arms are coming up, but they're not as high up as his body is. Now his body's starting to go down and stretch, but his arms are still following that initial path of action. His arms are stretching. His body's fully stretched out. He squashes again and up. And notice that the shadow reacts to the distance that he is away from the ground. And then he finally comes up and blinks his eyes. And that's that. So what do we do with these things? Well, I don't know. I think they're fun to do. I look at it as not discarding any ideas and keeping sort of a grab bag of fun, inspirational things. If nothing else, it's fun to share these bits and fun to share it with the whole audience in an auditorium. Good to have a laugh. And I think, though, that what we can extract from this is that there are really engaging aspects of animation, perhaps not in exactly this form, that can benefit our products and the users. And I will now segue to Sonia. Speaking of engaging, she will talk about video games. And I've lost my introduction to Sonia. Where is it? Here it is. Okay, we can look at other domains to improve the design of NT products. Sonia Bott will share some recently completed research on video games and discuss how we can find new ways to engage users of NT products. There you go.
When designing new and future products in the corporate design group, we're always striving to explore and discover possible paradigm shifts. And sometimes this is done by exploring domains fundamentally different than the one under investigation. Since video games are highly successful in captivating and engaging their users, not to mention that that industry is extremely successful as well, we use them as a mechanism to explore concepts that could be applied to network management products in order to achieve high levels of engagement and intrinsic user satisfaction. Now, along with the classical and formal analysis and design activities, and such activities include behavioral analysis, competitive analysis, object-oriented analysis, system modeling, visual language evolution, and so forth, we had the privilege of hiring a video game wizard to stimulate us into novel design dimensions. And I'm going to ask Adrian Blau to stand up and take a bow. He is our video game wizard. He just graduated from Bell High School last week, and he's going to be on our team until the end of the summer. And just as a little plug here, a core advantage of having students involved in such creative explorations are their fresh perspectives, their spontaneity, and their eagerness. The risk factors are very low, yet the payback can be very high. So over the next few minutes, we'll take a peek at some of the findings and results of our video games exploration and its application to network management. Now, I'm specifically going to focus on HCI mechanisms, where HCI stands for human-computer interaction. So here, we see a list of some of the predominant HCI mechanisms found to be successful in video games. They are simple interface, customizable controls, adjustable difficulty levels, user input is immediately acknowledged, status and information is readily available, the objects are self-explanatory, the graphics are beautiful, we have sound effects, background music, friendly instructions, and save game feature. Now, you'll notice that these mechanisms are all self-evident. There are no surprises in this list, and none of this is rocket science. You'll notice that many of the game HCI concepts that define a good game interface define a good interface in general. So it's not just one single mechanism that makes the user interface of a video game effective. Instead, it's the high quality, the combination, and the application of all the relevant mechanisms that lead to engagement and intrinsic satisfaction. All the parts of the system have to be carefully and very thoughtfully choreographed in order to fit in synchrony and harmony. Now that we have an idea of some of the HCI mechanisms in video games, let's just take a peek of where we stand today in the network management domain. In this example here, you see an interface that's primarily based on 1970s state-of-the-art technology and architecture. And the flavor here is one of monolithic tools. There are many rabbit runs for one function. It's a batch-style interaction. There's command line entry. There are many, many levels of hierarchy to traverse. There are mandatory, manual, and repeated entry of derivable data. And the users of such systems have to be very much knowledgeable of DMS software internals. And most of our products fit into this category today. Here, in this example, we see a paradigm shift to an evolved GUI style, GUI standing for Graphical User Interface. And that's a technology which gained momentum in the 1980s, and it still holds today. Now, GUIs allow for many degrees of freedom when designing product architectures, and hence also raise the risk for very poor design. But when designed well, GUIs could be an asset for profound simplicity. It can be an asset for integration of multiple information sources. It supports industry-accepted standards and functional models. It promotes a high-level systems view, and hierarchies can be considerably flattened. Now, our network management products today are following this style, and examples are Transport Node, Access Node, Concord Systems Management, and Meridian System Management products. Here we see an example of a video game, in particular Castle's Siege and Conquest. And it came out in 1992 on the IBM PC, and in 1994 for the Macintosh, and this is done by Interplay Productions. From this slide alone, and remember this is a static slide, it's not dynamic, so we're only seeing a small portion of it, we can see that the interface is simple, navigation is simple, i.e. the hierarchies are flattened, status and information are readily available, objects are self-explanatory, and the graphics are pretty good. Another video game, this one here is SimCity 2000, and that came out on the Mac in 1993 by Maxis. Again, from this slide alone, you can see that the interface again, is simple. Hierarchies are flattened. Information and status are readily available, and so on and so forth. So now that you've been exposed to some of the HCI mechanisms of video games and have a general idea of the current network management product interfaces, it's time to unveil our product-related results. So I'm not a professional animator, so you have to pretend this is a curtain. So voila. Here you see our vision for a resource management system. And the design you see here in this example was done by Doug Talbot, and he's a world-class visual designer on our team. So along with the classical and formal analysis and design activities, you can see that there are some similarities of good HCI design as in good video games too. So while the HCI design of the resource management system was taking place, some components of it were tested and evolved from the video games work that Adrian was doing at the same time. So for example, a preliminary indicator of the usability of this particular screen layout was confirmed through the success of the video games. You'll probably notice that this layout here for screens is not unique. Very good CAD products also have similar types of layouts. Finer details, such as putting the filter and command line information on the main screen, was influenced by the video game work. So for the full effect, we're going to watch a short clip of a video so you can have more of an experience with this particular piece of work.
The resource management system offers a simpler, more intuitive way of managing integrated broadband and narrowband transmission systems. The user interface offers a consolidated view and easy traversal of multi-layer networks. Navigation and viewing mechanisms are readily available to the user at all times. The main window has 6 components. The menu bar gives direct access to standard industry OAM functions. View controls support both physical and logical views of the network. The innovative hierarchy status list is a powerful navigation and status reporting mechanism. The viewing area concretely represents the multi-layered network with navigation capabilities. Its comprehensive visual language incorporates and evolves ANSI and ITU recommendations. Filters provide user customization for overlays of information in the viewing area. Finally, the integrated command line and search mechanism allows accelerated access for experienced users. Navigation is simple, quick, and intuitive. This is a geographical view of an integrated broadband network servicing about 6 million lines. By selecting the logical view icon, the corresponding logical view of the network is displayed. Here we see that the visual complexity of the network is significantly reduced, and that the network is partitioned for management purposes. By selecting the transport filter, the transport layer of the network is overlaid. Selecting the transport container and opening it gives the logical view of a 7-node, 4-fiber OC192 transport ring. Opening the linear group gives more details. And selecting the St. John ADM immediately gives the logical view of the OC48 St. John node. By selecting the physical view icon, the geographic view of the OC48 St. John node is displayed. Selecting the St. John ADM brings up the element browser showing the shelf view of the element. The user has now completely navigated through one layer of the transport network.
Okay.
Now let's navigate along another layer of the network. Here we see the...
Okay, what you've just seen here is that we've been able to successfully achieve a paradigm shift in the area of network management, where these concepts are currently being tested in the field with some very successful results. Although there are many facets to this product's development program, the creative exploration in the video game domain did contribute to our leap forwards. Now, due to the success of this exploration, we are continuing it, and we're going beyond the HCI mechanisms. We're going to be investigating behavioral principles and video game creation. How do the people who create video games design and develop their product? What is their process? So there's a lot that we can learn from and a lot that we can look forward to by doing this. And now, I'm going to hand the podium over to Alan Frank. Both Trish and I have discussed the transfer of ideas from non-traditional sources of animation in video games and NT products. We're now going to continue with this theme of creativity as a discovery of ideas. So Alan Frank is going to describe his use of experts in the field of theater and the dramatic arts to better understand the principles behind the success of people communicating to groups of other people.
Can everyone hear me? There we go. Okay. Normally, future services, talking about things like conference, teleconferencing, telecommunication services to our end users, are a series of incremental improvements on our current status. But there's a problem with the attitude of incremental improvement, which is everyone can think of how to change it a little. Unfair competitive advantage is only acquired by changing the rules. For example, the way that the graphic user interface was changed the rules from the command line interface. I was part of a group of people who were charged with trying to figure out how to change those rules so that in the next 10 to 20 years we might have strategies that can change the rules so that we recognize when we're pursuing incremental change versus changing the rules. Our hypothesis was that communication services that directly support human behavior can be adopted faster than those required, that we have to adapt our behavior to. For example, we can look at the success of the telephone over the telegraph. The telegraph worked, but it was not a very natural way to communicate. You had to give your message to an intermediary who put it into a code, sent it someplace else to another intermediary, and finally you got the message. With the telephone and the advent of direct dialing, of course, we could finally call up who we wanted to and start talking. So that's an example of an unfair advantage. An incremental improvement on a telegraph would be a telegraph that moved faster. Or, for example, the teletype could be an incremental improvement. You would send your message to an intermediary who would type it in, type it out at the other end, and send it off to a user. The area that we were interested in were people communicating with groups. Many of you have probably seen articles on the virtual corporation. A lot of us are working with consultants, working with strategic alliances. So the future is more and more going to revolve around people working with groups that are separated by geographic locations. We started thinking about current video technology and remembering my emphasis about providing services that can be used spontaneously. Most of us felt that video conferences are not a very spontaneous communication service, not very natural, and not even very comfortable. There are often long pauses, people trying to figure out who's going to interrupt. And if you've ever been involved in a multi-point video conference, there are all sorts of delays involved by switching from one site to another site that really make communication awkward. Rather than thinking about incremental improvements, making a faster video conference unit, making a higher bandwidth, we wanted to figure out how to change the rules. To do that, we needed a better understanding of how groups of people communicate. And we started looking toward theater because it's this wonderful art that can on demand create a communication event. It's had hundreds of years of experience developing its techniques, and good theater and the money it makes is quite successful, is self-evident. But there was a minor problem. Theater is an art, and as such, its people, its supporters are craftspeople. They're not really scientists. What we were looking for were essentially their unconscious guidelines that make them say, that scene doesn't look right, or this lighting doesn't feel right. So our challenge was to get these craftspeople, these theater experts, to spill the beans and tell us what they're doing. To do so, we thought we'd harness the ever-present fact that everyone's a critic. And what we thought we'd do is film business meetings and call them theater. And we could then give those meetings to our theater experts and say, can you critique these events as theater? What is good about them? What is bad about them? And then as they critiqued, we could develop the rules and the principles that they use to create a successful communication event. We wanted to, since we were interested in things like video conferencing, we wanted to include the impact of technology. So we, in fact, videotaped 3 meetings. The first was a meeting where everyone was present in the same space, and they had all sorts of objects to share. In fact, they were finishing up the design of the Toronto Police Museum. The second meeting was an audio conference of theater stage designers, and they had about 5 participants that were elsewhere attending via an audio bridge. And the last video were 2 groups of about equal size that were planning a commercial show. When we showed the videotapes to our experts, their initial reactions were, well, it's not bad theater, it's not the best thing. The reaction to the video conference was, well, it's a rather boring play about a table. And we kind of scratched our head, and they started talking to us. What was going on? What about it was good theater? What is badly deficient? And the first principle that we derived from these conversations were, you have to know what you're doing. Are you, to the people, is this a presentation or is this working? And this principle, is this a problem-solving meeting? This principle came from the observation that the good meetings that we had on tape looked more like a rehearsal than a theatric performance. The difference being a rehearsal is a problem-solving session. People get together, you're building an image, the cast, the directors, stage managers, everyone's working toward an event, a lot of problem-solving, a lot of iteration, a lot of spontaneous behaviors. The presentation is like a performance. It starts, it's canned, it ends, you can repeat it, and the audience is for the most part passive. Continuing in our I should say brain dump, we got to this generalization. When people are presenting, there are in fact 3 roles. There is a presenter, there are members of the audience, and there are support staffs. The audio conference, today's services don't distinguish those various roles. If you think about presenter versus audience, in an audio conference facility, when you're doing an audio conference, particularly this one in the director, we had 5 people coming out of a plastic box on the table, i.e. the speakerphone. They had no sense of presence at the meeting. There was no sense of how many people there were. In fact, as the meeting went on, a person at the meeting became the representative of the 5 people in the little plastic box on the table and made sure that they had equal opportunities to participate. In most facilities, they have no accommodation for support staff. Now, in this facility, it's rather large, and in fact, we do recognize support staff. John is helping us up there in the booth and is hooking in the various sources. But have you ever attended a video conference where the speaker is, in fact, turning around, putting a slide on the graphic transmitter, then turns back around and talks? No flow of information. The technology is getting in the way of the communication event. Continuing on other principles, we try to find out from them what does adherence to all these principles mean? Well, really it impacts the quality of the outcome. When people understand why they are where they are, in other words, what is the agenda of the meeting, when they understand why they are where they are, for example, in a room or in an office, when everyone feels like they're equally present, and when everyone can share things and manipulate the things that are shared, we have a fully successful rehearsal, a fully successful meeting. So far, the previous two slides I've talked about principles, and you're probably sitting there wondering, okay, how do you convert these into actionable, implementable services that we can support people and support the communication process with? We can turn these principles into what we call design goals. And in this slide, I try and capture and share with you some of the design goals regarding attention. Now, in a presentation, as I'm doing right now, I control what you see. I control your attention. However, in a working meeting, if I was to try and maintain this same control, I think other people in that meeting would be quite irritated and would begin to feel like this isn't a meeting. I've been brought into this room to be talked to be presented to. I'm sure we've all been in those. So if we were trying to build an environment or a service to support problem solving, the first thing is that information has to be controlled by each participant, not by myself as the speaker. This is, in fact, quite tricky because what you're literally talking about, for example, is a video conference facility where everyone has control of their own cameras so they can look at who they want, look at what they want at the same time. But again, if we're thinking about how to gain an unfair competitive advantage, these are the behaviors, these are the goals we need to support. The issue of presence came up rather early in brain dumps. And the reason being, in a performance, all I have to worry about is me being present. The audience, as I mentioned before, is passive. But in a working meeting, everyone has to have equal presence. And if, again, recall in your head the last video conference you attended, the far end, the audience, is on the wall with the data. They're not at the table. They do not have equal presence. So the design guideline we would hope we would be working for is to bring the people at all sites to the table and not have them stuck on the wall with the data. Continuing on with presence, we hit the topic of interruption. Probably you've all sat there very quietly in a video conference waiting for someone to finish speaking. And then, of course, if someone jumps in too fast, you've lost your turn. Interrupting in these conference facilities is quite unnatural. We would need to support far better interruption behavior for us to have a more natural communication environment. Talked before about each person has a known location. This came from the discussion of the audio conference where we had 5 people in a box. Hopefully in the future with stereo technologies we can start bringing people to the table even in audio conferencing. Finally, and this is an interesting one if any of you have ever worked with people in Harlow or Maidenhead, there has to be a common understanding of time. If you've ever been in a meeting with someone at 3, 4, 5 hours time shift, and someone starts yawning, the question is, did they just wake up or are they about ready to go to sleep? And we talk about making the meeting natural. Everyone here has a sense of time. It's lunchtime. Yet if we were to talk to a site at Maidenhead, for example, it would be almost supper time. So trying to transmit a common understanding of what time it is at each of the spots is also important for a successful rehearsal or a successful meeting. Time can, by the way, time can be extended into sharing. Have you ever been, again, someone at a remote site going, well, I'll show you this, and they're sitting there manipulating it at the far end and you can't. With greater electronic services and with the thinking about virtual reality, we can start to think about how to actually allow everyone at the meeting to have equal access to objects. And that being that the objects can be manipulated, they work in the appropriate time. As Trish said, well, this isn't working at the right time because time is important in animation. It's also important in getting work done. And that all objects are the same for all participants. That an image is not small on the wall and a video screen for some people and sitting on the table for other people. So that's how we tried to look for an understanding of behavior in the area of, we studied the area of theater to better understand human behavior in daily life, or in this case in business meetings. Moving on from here, creativity is not always a matter of understanding new ideas. Sometimes, as we talked about Pinder's law of conservation, is that you can take old ideas and still be creative. Ron is going to discuss with us the transfer of a strategy from one product domain to another. The creativity is in the transformation process.
Hi. Can everybody hear me? Good. All right. This presentation, what I'm going to talk to you about today, is probably something you already know. You're probably very familiar with it. But I'm going to try and just give you a reminder, a short reminder in my presentation of what, again, what something you really, what you do now that you already are familiar with. What it really is about is being creative in a practical way, or creativity on the cheap, if you look at it another way. About a year ago, I came into CDG. I was user interface designer in a development group, small key system, North Star. And back there, we were really on a nose to the grindstone, make it work, earnings line, get to the gate sort of attitude. And well, that was fine. That's the way it should be. And the idea of creativity there, perhaps, was more making it work. Okay. Then I came over to CDG. The first thing they gave me to do was revise, come up with a new concept for small system OAM. So I had a bunch of meetings with people, PLM and stuff like that, and we got information from customers. They were saying, well, our OAM is complex, it's slow, it's hard to use. Well, we know that. Okay. They look at me and they say, okay, we need a new one. One that's fast, it's easy, it's intuitive, all singing, all dancing, no documentation, no training. We always hear this every time we want to come up with a new concept. So, of course, they want everything and everything for free. And can you find an innovative, creative solution for us in a couple months by the next gate? Uh-oh. I didn't really consider myself a creative person at the time. Practical, maybe, but not creative. It's always makes you nervous when you feel you have to be creative. I had to do something original. So I went to the thesaurus. On the left, we have what Microsoft Word's thesaurus thinks or gives you for creativity. Artistic, beautiful, elegant, lovely, musical, poetic. Okay. I went to Roget's, or Rogers as I call him, Roget's thesaurus. And what they had in there was things like beginning, imaginative, original, originative, whatever that is, productive, and godlike. So I prayed. That didn't work. I didn't get an answer. So, basically, did I jump ahead of myself? Yeah. So what I did is I went back to those creative skills that made me really successful in school. I looked around, checked out what everybody else was doing. Okay, there's a book out, a lot of you have probably read it, called Thriving on Chaos by Tom Peters, and they're sort of institutionalizing this now. They call it creative swiping. There's a story in that book about this meeting he was at where there's this guy from the Pentagon and there's this guy that runs a little grocery store chain. And they're all talking about ideas and stuff, and this one idea that the general had about how to get this group to attack that group and all, or something like this, and the guy from the grocery store chain went, yeah, okay. And he went and did it in his store and had it implemented in about a couple days. Anyways, good book, go read it. So what was I doing? How did I start doing this creative swiping stuff? Well, what I did was I spent a fair bit of time hanging out with other teams, picking their brains, getting their managers, who I didn't work for, to attend some of my meetings. They're all really nice. They never once told me to go away. And I looked at a lot of their products. Got some examples here. You saw some from Sonia earlier. Got some from Alan earlier. Things like work that's being done in DMS public switching, ATM, Meridian Mail, M1 SMP, that's system management product. Is that it? I think so. And a bunch of others. I looked at some stuff that Harlow was working on. They'd been looking at some work Philips had been doing. I just looked and looked and looked. What I saw what they were doing, one of the things I saw they were doing is they were going for a convergence in OIM resource management. They went, okay, me too. But the real trick was, okay, could I get this strategy that was really looking at things that was designed for 10,000 lines, big systems, big networks, to go down to even 10, or maybe even 3? Yep. Because it's not so much the implementation itself that I was able to swipe, but it was the principles and ideas behind the strategy. And principally, there were two things there that I nipped out. And those were the object hierarchies and the FCAP actions or tools. Object hierarchies are just a way to present a model, a mental model of the product to users that is very familiar to them. So for a key system, on the left you'll see something I could put in a text-based list, such as the KSU, lines, sets, people, groups, system settings. And it also transfers over to graphic representation for a PC, icons. Now you have pictures of these things too. And I think it's important, as I learned from these guys, that you can actually represent them well pictorially, or iconize them, if that makes any sense. The notion of a hierarchy here is that you can open up any of these things and see the, for example, lines, all the different lines, whether they're ISDN, T1, people, the various people, users, that is, in the group. You get a list of users. It's a very simple system. It's a very simple hierarchy because it's the one they live with. The task partitioning model, that's FCAPS. That's a CCITT standard. That fit too, because all that talks about is what the people actually do with these objects. They look for faults, that's F. They configure them to get them to do different things, that's C. There's accounting that goes along with some of them, maybe not so much in a key system, but certainly in public switching. But later on, with a network key system, you probably want to check out what branch office is charging a lot of long-distance calls or something like that if you have a network system. What else we got there? We got performance, how well is my T1 or ISDN trunk doing, and security, who can get in and out. All those things are done right at the small level as well as the top. There's also a pull from some of the market segments. There's information about our Meridian partners and BT that say, you know, when we put all these boxes together, they always have to be admin differently. That means different training, different documentation, all this kind of stuff. So they're asking for a little bit of commonality from big to small. Okay, so what did I come up with? I needed to do it both on a set and a PC. So the big picture of the set there is has a list-based UI or menu-based user interface, and you can go up and down the lists, and you can open an object by pressing the right arrow, and this is the same list management user interface that users that operate sets use day to day for directories, feature lists, caller lists. So that's conserved as well. That's the same model for them. The hierarchy structure is the same objects going from the set to the PC. So that underlines, or that strategy works for both. FCAPs, we're working on putting them on soft keys on the sets, and of course they work perfectly fine as they were designed to off pull-down menus. We did some testing on this, and the testing results were pretty interesting. What we did is we just gave them some tasks, no documentation, no training, a little bit of introduction with respect to how to use a directory, and said, okay, now change this parameter, now change this parameter, now change this parameter. And we had them do it on a set prototype and a PC prototype. And the interesting thing about it is that naive users outperformed installers. If you didn't know anything, you could do it faster. Now, that's not always a good thing, but what we ran into there was something about people, professional users, that is, professional experts, having a vested interest in their knowledge. And that was pretty interesting. But that was something we had to work on. Okay. This also scales right up to M1. So if you are an installer, now your skill base potentially could be expanded from just using a Northstar Manager. You know the basics about how to use SMP. So that's probably the value to them. They may not understand it right away, but they're professionals. They'll get trained. And they can also broaden their skills out of key systems to M1. Okay, so basically, all I have to say, my only message is what I call the third law of creativity. Ideas are never created or destroyed. They're just transformed and reused. Now maybe, what was I going to say here? Looking at my notes. Talk slowly. No. Some of this is being done in a major effort called Rainbow. I was at a presentation by Russ Jones the other day, and he was talking about trying to steal ideas, pull them in, rather than creating the wheel all over again. So in a practical sense, I'm just suggesting we need to remember creativity is more of a process of searching, looking around, rather than coming up with something completely original. I don't know what the first two laws are. Maybe you can figure them out. Okay, that's about all I have. Now our last vignette will demonstrate that a metaphor can be mightier than a PowerPoint presentation. Imagine sitting through a PowerPoint presentation carefully outlining the important aspects of some strategic initiative. I'm sure you've been to a presentation like that in the past month or week. Now, I'd like you to relax and enjoy the following presentation by Gord Hopkins and decide for yourself, is the metaphor mightier than a powered point? Gord.
Sometimes difficult living up to the introductions that you get. What I'm going to show you is one of the presentations that we did shortly before Christmas for our GIS, and we were sort of posed with a way of encapsulating in a very short period of time some sort of difficult ideas and concepts, and we wanted, one, a way of communicating it effectively, and two, putting it in a form that people could relate to, and also that was a little bit memorable that they could take away with them. So I think we're one slide out of sync here, but the project that we had been working on, this is with Tricia Brooks and Paul McDonald, something that we call the whole product experience, and we've affectionately called it Making Whoopee. The team consists of the following people. Not mentioned on the previous slide was Jacques Gagnon, who's currently over in Harlow, and Arnold Campbell, our manager. In some previous work that we had done, we'd looked at the stages that a consumer goes through in engaging with a product. And what we found was that people could identify the stages that you see here in the slide, and that we concentrated a lot of our effort in the bottom left corner. After they get it home, can they use it? How do they like it at that point? And we were largely neglecting a lot of the other stages in this relationship, even though they put a lot of importance on the earlier stages that you see at the top in terms of assessing what they've got out there, trying to figure out if they've got the right thing, and committing to it. We've called this multi-stage relationship a whole product experience, and we feel that by identifying and addressing some of these other stages, we have an opportunity to leverage our designs even more. The next thing we did, and is the bulk of this presentation, is we looked at, well, we sell a lot of our products through the channel chooser setup rather than to end consumers. So how does that differ? The channel chooser relationship, when we went out and explored it in focus groups, we found that, just for your information, the channel is the telco or the distributor. The chooser can be a buyer or purchasing agent in various companies. And the user, obviously, is the end user. The relationship that we found to be most important is the one between the chooser and the channel. They didn't talk about the product per se. The product is important, but for them, they're building up a long-standing relationship between themselves and who they get the products from. The product has a limited lifetime, and then they're going to be on to a new product. So although the product is important, this is the more important relationship. And we started asking ourselves, what can we do to try and address this relationship in our products to make our products easier to choose? The width of the arrows that you see here represent the relative importance to these people of the relationship. So the weakest one being the channel user relationship. You may question whether that's appropriate or not. As we were starting to talk about the channel chooser relationship and how to convey this, it reminded us of a metaphor that we've based on a movie. And unfortunately, at this point, because we don't have clearance for some of the video clips, I'm going to have to ask David up in the booth to discontinue videoing this part for the purposes of the videotape that's being made. However, the movie that we settled on was Sleepless in Seattle, where we have a relationship of a father, for those of you who are unfamiliar with it, Sam, who's looking around for a potential mother for his child, Jonah. However, he's also, whether he knows it or not, he's looking for a potential mate for himself, and actually that's the most important element. He has to find an effective mate relationship, but this relationship with the son is also equally important. I'm going to turn the podium over to Alan Frank again.
That completes our show for today. Thank you all for staying. I know we've appeared to have run a little late. Last year, we hoped you left with the message that creativity, it's not Mickey Mouse, it's a very serious issue. Well, kind of, sort of serious, kind of. This year, we wanted to share with you various ways in which a little bit of fairy dust and permission not to follow a straight line can add creativity to a project. It makes little difference whether the fairy dust comes from past experiences, such as Trish's background in animation, or from the curiosity to stretch something, like an OA&M strategy from PBXs to key systems, or just the desire to find a different way, a more engaging way to communicate a message. Creativity comes in many flavors. From Mickey to Goofy, it's still creativity. So thank you very much.